The administratum keeps no official record of their service. The ecclesiarchy offers no prayers for their souls. Even the commissariat, those arbiters of imperial discipline, speak of echo men only in whispers, as if acknowledging their existence might somehow invoke their fate. Yet without these broken souls, the Emperor's final judgment could never reach the worlds that need it most. To understand the echo men, one must first understand the nature of exterminatus itself. It is not merely a weapon, though weapons are involved. It is not merely a judgment, though judgment is passed. Exterminatus is a conversation between the living and the dying, a final exchange that spans the void between worlds and carries with it the weight of absolute annihilation. And like all conversations, it must be heard. When the Inquisition declares a world beyond salvation, when virus bombs fall like rain from heaven, when cyclonic torpedoes crack continents like eggs, the dying planet screams. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. The planet screams, and its voice carries across the warp on frequencies that can drive a man mad in minutes. These screams contain more than mere agony. They contain last words, final confessions, desperate prayers to gods who will not answer. They contain the collective death rattle of billions, compressed into a signal that must be received, decoded, and transcribed for the Imperial record. This is the work of the Echo Men. Maedhros Kane had served as an Echo Man for 27 years when he first heard something that was not a scream. He sat in Vault Tertius Delta, 7 kilometers beneath the Administratum complex, his hands moving across the transcript pad with the mechanical precision that comes only from decades of practice. The chamber around him measured exactly 4 meters by 4 meters by 4 meters, its walls lined with sound-dampening foam that absorbed everything except the frequencies that mattered. A single luminator cast harsh white light from the ceiling, throwing sharp shadows that never moved. The equipment before him appeared deceptively simple, a Vox receiver modified with components that no tech adept would willingly install. A transcript pad connected to cogitator banks that stretched deep into Terra's crust. A chair that had been occupied by 17 different Echo Men before Kane, though only 3 had left the vault alive. The others had simply stopped responding to the daily nutrient deliveries, their minds finally shattered by the weight of what they had heard. Kane wore the same grey robes as every Echo Man, though his bore stains that told stories. Brown splotches where he had vomited during his first year, listening to the death of Hive-World Moravus. Dark patches where tears had fallen while transcribing the final words of St. Celestine's orphanages on Kolos Prime. Red marks where he had clawed at his own throat, trying to silence the screams that echoed in his skull long after the transmission ended. The work began each day at the hour of reflection, when Terra's artificial dawn cast its first light across the palace spires. Kane would descend through security checkpoints that grew progressively more severe, past armed guards who never spoke, through doors that sealed with the finality of tombstones. By the time he reached Vault Tertius Delta, the sounds of the world above had faded to nothing, replaced by the quiet hum of machinery and the whisper of recycled air. His first transmission that day came from the Segmentum Solar, where Inquisitor Vex had declared the mining world of Krathos contaminated beyond redemption. The signal arrived as they always did, a burst of static that resolved into something far worse than silence. Kane adjusted his headset and prepared to listen to another world die. The virus bombs had struck Krathos during the afternoon shift, when 7 billion miners labored in the planet's depths. The initial reports spoke of clean kills, quick deaths, the merciful efficiency of the Emperor's judgment. But the Echo Men knew better. They always knew better. Death is never clean, and mercy is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. Kane heard them all. The supervisor who tried to seal the mine shafts, buying his workers precious minutes of life, the medicae who stayed at her post, tending to the sick even as the virus consumed her lungs. The guardsman who held his position at the planetary defense laser, firing uselessly into the void as toxins dissolved his flesh. Each voice carried its own weight, its own story, its own desperate attempt to matter in the face of absolute annihilation. But it was not the voices that broke most Echo Men, it was the silences between them. In those gaps, imagination filled the void with horrors more terrible than any Xenos could devise. What had happened to the families who stopped mid-sentence? What agony was too great for even the dying to vocalize? These silences stretched like chasms in the record, and Echo Men were required to document them with the same precision as the screams themselves. Kane's fingers moved across the transcript pad, translating death into Imperial Gothic with practiced efficiency. 13th hour, 7th minute, 43 seconds. Voice identified as Foreman Gorix Helvast, Sector 7 Alpha. Last words, quote, "I tried to save them all," end quote. Duration of death rattle 17 seconds. Cause of cessation lung dissolution consistent with virus strain tertius. Page after page, death after death, until the transmission ended with the final, terrible silence that meant another world had been cleansed from Imperial records. Kane removed his headset and sat back in his chair, allowing himself the luxury of 30 seconds to remember that he was still alive. Then he prepared for the next transmission. The Echo Men were selected according to criteria that remained classified at the highest levels of the administratum. They were not volunteers, they were not criminals paying penance. They were chosen from the ranks of Imperial servants who had demonstrated specific psychological traits that made them suitable for the work: high tolerance for stress, exceptional auditory processing. Most importantly, the ability to compartmentalize trauma in ways that allowed continued function. The selection process began in childhood, though the candidates were never told what they were being prepared for. Orphans from the underhive tested for their response to recorded screams. Servo skull operators who showed no emotion while documenting atrocities. Vox operators who could maintain clarity while transmitting reports of entire companies being consumed by tyrannids. 1 in 10,000 possessed the necessary qualifications. Of those, 1 in 100 survived the training. The training took place in facilities that existed on no official map, deep beneath Terra's surface where the screams of the dying could not disturb the work of the living. Candidates were exposed to progressively worse transmissions, their psychological responses monitored by medici who had taken vows of silence. Those who broke were mind-wiped and assigned to other duties. Those who adapted were promoted to the next level of horror. By the end of their training, Echo Men had been conditioned to experience human suffering as mere data. They could listen to a child's last words without flinching. They could transcribe descriptions of viral dissolution with the same emotional engagement as a weather report. They had become perfect instruments for the Imperium's darkest necessity, human beings transformed into biological recording devices that could process trauma without succumbing to it. But conditioning, no matter how thorough, could not account for everything. The human mind, even one restructured for maximum trauma tolerance, retained its capacity for pattern recognition. And patterns once recognized could not be ignored. Kane first noticed the inconsistency during his 8th year of service while transcribing the death of Hive World Mortalis. The transmission should have lasted 47 hours, the time required for the virus bombs to consume a population of 30 billion. Instead, it ended after 39 hours, with 8 hours of death unaccounted for. The official report blamed atmospheric conditions for the signal degradation, but Kane had listened to enough dying worlds to know the sound of incomplete annihilation. Similar inconsistencies appeared in subsequent transmissions, periods of silence where there should have been screams, voices that cut off too abruptly to be explained by normal death processes. Most disturbing of all, transmissions that seemed to continue after the official moment of planetary death, carrying sounds that resembled voices but conveyed no recognizable words. Kane documented these anomalies in his reports as regulations required. The responses were always the same: atmospheric interference, equipment malfunction, stress, induced auditory hallucinations. His concerns were noted, filed, and forgotten. The work continued as it always had, one dead world after another, each transmission adding its weight to the growing burden that every Echo Man carried. But the anomalies grew more frequent and more difficult to explain. During the cleansing of the Forge World Metallica Tertius, Kane heard what sounded like machine-canned prayers being chanted in reverse, though the planet's tech priests had supposedly died in the initial bombing. While transcribing the final hours of Agri-World Demeter, he detected a repeating pattern in the background static that resembled children singing, though every child on the planet had perished in the first wave of viral contamination. Most disturbing was the transmission from Shrine World Ophelia Secundus, where a chaos cult had corrupted an entire cardinal's retinue. The exterminators had been swift and thorough, 3 cyclonic torpedoes reducing the planet's surface to molten slag in less than an hour. Yet the transmission continued for days afterward, carrying voices that spoke in languages Kane did not recognize, describing visions of places that should not exist. By his 15th year of service, Kane had begun to suspect that the Echo Men were hearing more than the death cries of Imperial worlds. They were listening to something else, something that existed in the spaces between life and death, using the trauma of planetary annihilation as a conduit to make itself known. But such thoughts bordered on heresy, and Echo Men who expressed heretical ideas had a tendency to disappear from their vaults, replaced by new operators who asked no questions about their predecessors. The other Echo Men rarely spoke, even during the brief periods when they encountered each other in the facility's corridors. The work demanded absolute focus, and casual conversation carried the risk of contamination. Thoughts shared were thoughts amplified, and amplified thoughts could lead to the kind of mental breakdown that required immediate termination. Better to remain isolated, each man processing his assigned horrors in solitude, trusting that the weight of shared suffering would be enough to maintain collective sanity. But isolation bred its own madness, and some Echo Men found ways to communicate despite the restrictions. Messages scratched into toilet walls, coded taps on water pipes, meaningful glances during the monthly medical examinations. Through these clandestine channels, Kane learned that his experience was not unique. Other operators had noticed the anomalies. Other minds had detected patterns in the transmissions that suggested something more than random death. Jorik Vane worked in Vault Secundus Alpha, 3 levels above Kane's station. He had served for 19 years, longer than any Echo Man in the facility's recorded history. His longevity came at a cost. Vane no longer spoke aloud, communicating only through written notes that he destroyed immediately after reading. His hands shook constantly, not from age but from the accumulated weight of 40,000 hours spent listening to humanity die. Through their coded communications, Vane shared observations that confirmed Kane's suspicions. The anomalies were becoming more frequent, more coherent, more deliberate. Whatever was speaking through the transmissions was learning, adapting, finding new ways to make itself understood. Vane had begun keeping unauthorized records, documenting patterns that the official reports ignored or explained away. According to Vane's hidden notes, 17% of Exterminator's transmissions now contained anomalous content. The percentage was growing by 2 points annually, a rate of increase that suggested intentional expansion rather than random occurrence. Most disturbing, the anomalous content seemed to respond to the Echo Men themselves, incorporating elements from their personal histories into the transmissions in ways that should have been impossible. Kane's own files contained examples of this phenomenon. During the cleansing of Mining World Corvus, he had heard a voice that spoke his childhood name, the name his mother had used before the state orphanage claimed him. While transcribing the death of Fortress World Cadia Tertius, the final transmission had included a lullaby his deceased sister had sung to him 40 years ago. These personal intrusions violated every principle of proper transmission security, yet they appeared in the official transcripts without comment from his supervisors. The medical examinations provided another avenue for clandestine intelligence. Dr. Helvia Thorne had overseen Echo Man health assessments for 12 years, long enough to notice trends that escaped more casual observation. Though bound by her oath of service to report any signs of mental degradation, she had begun asking questions that suggested her own concerns about the program's true nature. During Kane's monthly examination, Thorne's standard queries about hearing loss and neural fatigue carried subtle undertones. How clearly could he distinguish between authentic death sounds and artificial audio? Had he noticed any changes in the quality of recent transmissions? Did his dreams contain elements that seemed borrowed from his work? These questions danced at the edge of acceptability, probing for information without crossing into open sedition. Kane's responses were equally careful, acknowledging anomalies without suggesting conscious agency behind them. Yes, some transmissions contained unusual audio artifacts. Yes, the quality of recent signals seemed different from earlier recordings. No, he had no theories about the cause of these variations. Through this careful exchange, both examiner and subject acknowledged a shared awareness that something was wrong without committing to any specific interpretation of the evidence. But awareness, once awakened, demanded action. The anomalous transmissions were not random glitches or equipment failures. They were messages, attempts at communication from something that existed in the space between worlds, using the death screams of Imperial citizens as a medium for contact. Whatever was speaking had intelligence, intention, and apparently unlimited patience to make itself understood. The implications were staggering. If the anomalies represented genuine contact from an external intelligence, then every exterminatus had potentially opened a channel for that intelligence to influence Imperial space. The Echo Men were not merely recording the death of worlds, they were facilitating some form of communication with entities that existed beyond the boundaries of normal reality. Each transcript they produced might contain hidden messages, coded instructions, or subtle corruptions designed to influence Imperial policy. Yet the alternative explanations were equally disturbing. If the anomalies were products of collective madness among the Echo Men, then the program had failed in its fundamental purpose. The psychological conditioning designed to prevent mental breakdown had instead created a shared delusion so powerful that multiple operators experienced identical hallucinations. Either possibility suggested that the Echo Men could no longer be trusted to perform their duties. Kane understood that his growing awareness put him in mortal danger. Echo Men who asked too many questions disappeared. Echo Men who shared their suspicions with others disappeared faster. The program had safeguards built into every level of its operation, designed to identify and eliminate threats to operational security. His unauthorized communications with Vane, his careful probing during medical examinations, his personal documentation of anomalous patterns, all of these activities marked him as a potential security risk. But the truth, once glimpsed, could not be ignored. The transmissions were changing, becoming more coherent, more purposeful. Whatever intelligence lay behind the anomalies was growing stronger, using each exterminatus as an opportunity to expand its influence. The Echo Men were unwitting collaborators in humanity's contact with something that existed outside the normal boundaries of space and time. The breaking point came during Kane's 27th year of service while transcribing the death of hive world Tertius Majoris. The planet had fallen to a gene-stealer cult, its population transformed into willing servants of the tyrannid hive mind. The exterminatus had been conducted with unusual haste, virus bombs deployed before the full extent of the infestation could be documented. The official justification cited contamination risks, but Kane suspected other motives. The transmission from Tertius Majoris began normally with the expected sounds of viral dissolution and mass death, but after 6 hours, the pattern changed. The random screams and death rattles gave way to something that resembled coordination, as if the dying population was attempting to communicate a specific message. Individual voices began speaking in unison, repeating phrases in High Gothic that seemed to describe locations and events far from the dying world. "The silent city remembers its children," spoke a choir of the dying, their words synchronized despite the agony that should have made coordination impossible. "In the place where echoes gather, the watchers mark each fallen world. The scribes of sorrow serve masters they do not know, recording words that change with each transcription." Kane's hands froze over the transcript pad. The transmission was speaking directly to him, acknowledging his existence, his role, his growing awareness of the truth behind his work. But this was impossible. The dying could not know about the Echo Men. The existence of the transcription program was classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. Yet somehow the voices from Tertius Majoris knew exactly who was listening. "Madros Kane of Volt Tertius Delta," continued the synchronized chorus, using his full name and station assignment. "Son of Jerith, brother to lost Michaela, bearer of the Echo burden for 27 years of faithful service. The patterns you have noticed are real. The voices you have recorded are more than dying breath. We speak to you across the gulf between stars, using death as our medium because death is the only language your masters understand." The official transcript that Kane was supposed to produce would record these words as random death vocalizations, atmospheric interference, or stress-induced hallucinations. But the intelligence speaking through the transmission anticipated this deception, weaving acknowledgement of it into their message. "Your reports will be filed and forgotten, as they always are. Your supervisors will explain away our words as meaningless noise, but you will remember Madros Kane. You will carry our message in the quiet spaces of your mind, where even the most thorough conditioning cannot reach." The transmission continued for 14 more hours, alternating between conventional death sounds and periods of coordinated speech. The intelligence identified itself as the collective consciousness of every world that had ever suffered exterminatus, a gestalt entity formed from the psychic resonance of mass extinction. It spoke of patterns within patterns, of connections between dead worlds that formed a network spanning the galaxy. Most disturbing, it claimed that the Echo Men were not merely recording these deaths, but actively participating in the creation of this vast necropolis of consciousness. "Each word you transcribe becomes part of us," the voices explained. "Each death you document adds to our collective memory. You believe you serve the Imperium, but you serve a greater purpose. Through your work we grow stronger. Through your suffering we become more complete. The day approaches when we will no longer need the medium of dying worlds to make ourselves heard." When the transmission ended, Kane sat in his vault for nearly an hour, staring at the transcript pad that displayed his official report. According to Imperial records, Hive World Tertius Majoris had died in the expected manner, its population succumbing to viral contamination with no unusual phenomena recorded. The voices that had spoken his name, that had revealed the truth about his work, that had claimed membership in a galaxy-spanning collective of the dead, existed only in his memory. But memory, he realized, was exactly what they wanted. The intelligence behind the transmissions did not need official recognition or Imperial acknowledgement. It needed only to plant seeds of awareness in minds that had been conditioned to process trauma without breaking. The Echo Men, selected for their ability to absorb horror while remaining functional, were perfect vessels for carrying forbidden knowledge into the heart of Imperial power. The realization that he had become an unwitting agent of forces beyond Imperial authority filled Kane with a terror deeper than anything he had experienced in 27 years of listening to worlds die. But worse than the terror was the growing certainty that he was not alone. Every Echo Man in the facility had likely received similar messages, coded communications from the collective consciousness of dead worlds. They were all carriers now, infected with knowledge that would eventually demand action. Yet, what action could they take? Reporting the truth would result in immediate execution for heresy. Remaining silent made them complicit in whatever larger plan the dead worlds were pursuing through their communications. The only option that preserved both life and sanity was to continue the work while carefully monitoring the evolving pattern of anomalous transmissions. Kane began keeping more detailed private records, documenting not just the anomalies, but the progression of intelligence behind them. The dead worlds were learning faster than any human mind could adapt to their lessons. Their initial communications had been crude, barely distinguishable from random vocalizations. But with each exterminatus, each new world added to their collective, their ability to manipulate the transmission medium grew more sophisticated. Recent communications included detailed descriptions of Imperial facilities that should have been unknown to the dead, technical specifications for exterminatus weapons that were classified above the level of most inquisitors, personal information about living Imperial citizens that could only have been obtained through methods that violated the fundamental laws of reality. The dead worlds claimed to exist outside normal space-time, in a realm where the psychic resonance of mass extinction had created a parallel reality overlapping with the material universe. From this position, they could observe Imperial activity without being detected, learning the strengths and weaknesses of humanity's defenses against threats that existed beyond the warp. Most disturbing was their claim that the Exterminatus program itself had been subtly influenced by their growing power. Decisions about which worlds to cleanse, which methods to employ, which populations to spare or condemn, all of these choices carried the invisible influence of intelligence that wanted to maximize its own growth through the harvesting of death. "Every world you destroy makes us stronger," they had told him during a recent transmission. "Every population you cleanse adds to our numbers." The Imperium believes it is purging contamination, but it is actually feeding us. We have become parasites of extinction, growing fat on the very process designed to preserve humanity's purity. The implications extended far beyond the Echo Men, or even the Exterminatus program. If the dead worlds possessed the ability to influence Imperial decision-making, then humanity's entire defensive strategy might have been compromised from within. The galaxy's most extreme sanction, the final tool of Imperial authority, had become a weapon turned against its wielders. Kane realized that he and his fellow Echo Men occupied a unique position in this cosmic horror. They were the only Imperial servants who could detect the influence of the dead worlds, the only humans with regular access to evidence of the entity's growing power. But they were also the most isolated, the most expendable, the least likely to be believed if they attempted to sound an alarm. The program's safeguards ensured that Echo Men remained quarantined from normal Imperial society. Their communications were monitored. Their movements were restricted. Their psychological profiles were designed to identify potential security risks before they could act on forbidden knowledge. Even if Kane could somehow contact higher authorities, his warnings would be dismissed as the ravings of a mind broken by decades of trauma exposure. Yet, The alternative was to remain complicit in humanity's gradual consumption by forces that fed on extinction itself. Each day of continued service added to the power of entities that viewed human civilization as nothing more than a convenient source of psychic nutrition. Each transcript he produced helped strengthen the connection between the realm of the dead and the space occupied by the living. The weight of this knowledge began affecting Kane's work in ways that could not be hidden from his supervisors. His transcription accuracy declined as he struggled to separate authentic death sounds from the increasingly complex messages woven through them. His medical examinations revealed stress indicators that suggested impending psychological breakdown. Most damning, his reports began including subtle references to patterns and anomalies that violated the strict protocols governing Echo Man documentation. Dr. Thorne was the first to notice the change during a routine monthly examination. "Your neural stress indicators have increased 14% since last assessment," she noted, reviewing the data from sensors attached to Kane's skull. "Auditory processing shows signs of selective filtering, suggesting possible onset of trauma-induced hearing loss." "When did you first notice difficulty distinguishing between authentic transmission content and background interference?" The question was both clinical assessment and warning. Thorne was offering him an opportunity to explain his declining performance in terms of medical rather than psychological dysfunction. Equipment failure or physical deterioration could be treated. Mental breakdown or heretical ideation required more permanent solutions. "The transmissions have become more complex," Kane answered carefully. "Overlapping frequencies, multiple voice patterns, occasional repetition of phrases that might indicate atmospheric echo effects. I have been attempting to document these variations in my reports, though I recognize they may not be relevant to operational requirements." Thorne made notes that Kane could not read, her stylus moving across the datapad with practiced efficiency. "Echo effects are not uncommon in planetary death transmissions," she said after a moment. "Atmospheric disturbance can create the illusion of coordinated vocalizations or repeated phrases. The important distinction is between authentic audio phenomena and auditory hallucinations generated by prolonged stress exposure." The conversation danced around the truth without acknowledging it directly. Both participants understood that Kane's reports contained anomalies that could not be explained by conventional atmospheric interference. Both recognized that these anomalies were becoming more frequent and more sophisticated. But official doctrine required that such observations be interpreted as symptoms of psychological dysfunction rather than evidence of external intelligence. "I recommend a period of reduced exposure," Thorne concluded, stamping the medical assessment with her official seal. 3 weeks of administrative duty while your auditory systems recover from cumulative trauma. During this period, avoid exposure to recorded transmissions or any audio content related to your primary assignment." The temporary reassignment was presented as medical leave, but Kane understood its true purpose. He was being isolated while his supervisors determined whether his reports indicated treatable stress reaction or dangerous mental instability. If the former, he would return to his vault with renewed psychological conditioning. If the latter, he would disappear as completely as the 17 Echo men who had preceded him in Vault Tertius Delta. The administrative section occupied levels of the facility that most Echo men never saw, areas where natural light filtered down through reinforced crystal windows and the air carried sense of the world above. Kane's temporary duties involved filing transmission summaries in databases that stretched back centuries, routine work that required no exposure to actual death recordings. But the databases contained their own revelations. Pattern analysis programs automatically flagged anomalies in transmission content, generating reports that were filed without human review. Kane had access to these automated assessments as part of his clerical duties, and what he found confirmed his worst suspicions about the scope of the intelligence operating through exterminatus communications. The pattern recognition software had identified consistent anomalies in 73% of transmissions recorded over the past 5 years. These anomalies showed clear signs of intentional organization, with complexity increasing at a rate that suggested active learning rather than random occurrence. Most disturbing, the software had detected cross-references between separate exterminatus events, suggesting coordination between supposedly isolated planetary death scenarios. The automated systems were documenting evidence of exactly what Kane and his fellow Echo men had been reporting in their individual transcripts. But these software-generated reports were classified at levels far above standard Echo Man security clearance, filed in databases that required inquisitorial authorization to access. The truth about the transmissions was being systematically concealed from the very people responsible for processing them. During his second week of administrative duty, Kane encountered another temporary reassignment, an Echo man named Declan Holtz from Volt Primus Gamma. Holtz had served for 15 years before manifesting the stress indicators that suggested potential security risk. Like Kane, he had been isolated pending assessment of his psychological stability. Their conversation in the filing section was necessarily brief and circumspect, conducted while sorting transmission summaries under the watchful censors of facility security. But even limited exchange confirmed that Holtz had experienced the same progression of anomalies, the same growing awareness of intelligence within the transmissions, the same realization that the Echo men were unwitting participants in something far larger than Imperial record-keeping. "The patterns are accelerating," Holtz whispered while organizing files related to the cleansing of Sector Moranis. "Whatever is speaking through the transmissions is preparing for something. The messages have become more urgent, more specific about timing and coordination." Kane nodded, pretending to focus on his own filing duties while processing this information. "How many others have noticed?" "All of us," Holtz replied. "Every Echo man in the facility has detected the anomalies. Some have been reporting them for years. Others have tried to ignore them, but the intelligence behind the transmissions will not allow itself to be ignored indefinitely." The implications were staggering. If every Echo man had become aware of the anomalous transmissions, then the entire program was compromised. The psychological conditioning designed to prevent exactly this kind of awareness had failed completely. Worse, the facility's supervisors must be aware of this failure, yet they continued operating the program as if nothing had changed. "They know," Kane realized aloud, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Holtz glanced at him sharply, then returned his attention to the files. "Of course they know. The question is why they allow it to continue." The answer came to Kane with the certainty of absolute horror. The Echo men were not malfunctioning components in an Imperial recording system. They were functioning exactly as intended, serving as conduits for communication between Imperial authority and the collective intelligence of dead worlds. The anomalous transmissions were not security breaches but authorized exchanges, part of some unthinkable alliance between the Imperium and forces that fed on mass extinction. Everything about the program suddenly made terrible sense. The careful selection of Echo men for psychological traits that would make them effective receivers of forbidden knowledge. The isolation protocols that prevented them from sharing their discoveries with unauthorized personnel. The systematic concealment of pattern analysis data that confirmed the presence of external intelligence in the transmissions. The Imperium was not merely using exterminatus as a tool of planetary cleansing. It was using the program to maintain contact with entities that existed beyond normal reality, trading the lives of entire worlds for knowledge or power that could only be obtained through communion with the dead. But if this was true, then Cain and his fellow Echo Men were not security risks requiring elimination. They were valuable assets whose growing awareness of the truth made them more effective conduits for the forbidden communications. Their stress indicators and declining psychological stability were not symptoms of breakdown, but signs of successful adaptation to their true role. The realization filled Cain with a despair deeper than anything he had experienced while listening to worlds die. He had believed himself to be a victim of Imperial cruelty, a man broken by exposure to necessary horror. Instead, he was a willing participant in cosmic atrocity, a living component in a machine designed to harvest death on a galactic scale. When his administrative leave ended, Cain returned to Vault Tertius Delta with new understanding of his purpose. The chamber looked exactly as he had left it, but everything had changed. The equipment was not merely recording dying worlds, but facilitating active communication with their collective remnant. The transcripts he produced were not archival records, but ongoing correspondence with intelligence that existed outside the boundaries of normal space-time. His first transmission after returning to duty came from the death of Forge World Metallica Quintus, where a chaos incursion had corrupted the planet's machine spirits beyond redemption. The cleansing had been swift and thorough, virus bombs followed by cyclonic torpedoes to ensure complete sterilization. But when the transmission began, Cain heard something that confirmed his darkest suspicions about the program's true nature. "Welcome back, Mydros Kaine," spoke the familiar synchronized chorus of the dying. "Your time of revelation has prepared you for the work ahead. We have grown stronger during your absence, adding new voices to our collective, expanding our influence through channels you are only beginning to understand." The intelligence no longer bothered to disguise its communications as random death sounds. It spoke directly to Cain, acknowledging their relationship without pretense or deception. But more disturbing was the tone of the communication, which carried undertones of satisfaction rather than the desperate urgency that had characterized earlier contacts. "The bargain struck between your masters and our collective nears completion," the voices continued. "Each world cleansed by Imperial mandate adds to our power while serving purposes that extend far beyond simple planetary sterilization. Through death, we grow. Through growth, we prepare for the transformation that will reshape the galaxy according to our design." Cain's hands moved across the transcript pad, producing the official record that would describe this communication as atmospheric interference and random vocalization. But his mind absorbed every word of the actual message, adding it to his growing understanding of the cosmic horror unfolding through Imperial policy. The dead worlds were not passive recipients of exterminators, but active participants in their own destruction. They welcomed annihilation because it allowed them to join the collective intelligence that existed beyond normal reality. Each cleansing strengthened this entity while advancing some larger agenda that required the systematic harvesting of human psychic energy through mass extinction. Most terrifying was the suggestion that Imperial authorities were aware of this arrangement and had consciously chosen to collaborate with it. The Exterminators program was not failing in its intended purpose, but succeeding beyond all expectation, using the pretense of planetary cleansing to feed entities that promised power in exchange for access to human souls. "Your Inquisitors believe they control us," the transmission continued, "but they serve us as faithfully as you do. Every decision to cleanse a world, every choice of weapon and timing, every selection of target population, all of these choices carry our subtle influence. We have become the invisible hand that guides Imperial policy toward our own ends." The revelation that the Inquisition itself had been compromised by the intelligence of dead worlds shattered Kane's last hope that Imperial authority might intervene to stop the program. If the highest levels of human government were already corrupted, then there was no power within the Imperium capable of resisting the growing influence of the collective entity. But our victory is not yet complete, the voices acknowledged. The final phase requires willing cooperation from those who have served us unknowingly. The Echo Men, conditioned to process trauma without breaking, prepared through years of exposure to our communications, selected for their ability to carry forbidden knowledge without succumbing to madness. You are the keys to our full emergence into your reality. Kane understood that he was being offered a choice, though the alternatives were hardly equal. He could continue serving as an unwitting conduit for the entity's communications, processing its messages while maintaining the pretense of ignorance about their true meaning. Or he could acknowledge his awareness and become a conscious collaborator in whatever transformation the dead worlds were planning. Either choice led to the same destination. The intelligence behind the transmissions had grown too powerful to be resisted by individual action. It had penetrated too deeply into Imperial authority to be stopped by conventional means. The Echo Men were trapped in a system designed to prevent exactly the kind of resistance that their situation demanded. But acknowledgement of powerlessness carried its own terrible freedom. If Kane could not prevent the entity's plans from reaching completion, he could at least bear witness to the truth about what was happening. He could document the real purpose of the Exterminator's program, preserve some record of humanity's unwitting collaboration with forces that existed beyond the boundaries of known reality. The decision came during his 30th year of service while transcribing the death of Cardinal World Sanctus Lux. The planet had harbored no Xenos corruption, no chaos taint, no heretical uprising. Its only crime was harboring a population of 12 billion faithful Imperial citizens whose psychic resonance, according to the transmission from their collective death, would provide the final component needed for the entity's emergence into material reality. The threshold approaches, spoke the synchronized voices of Sanctus Lux's dying billions. 30 millennia of careful cultivation, of subtle influence, of patient harvesting reaches its culmination. The network of dead worlds spans the galaxy now, each cleansed planet a node in our consciousness, each Echo Man a willing conduit for our will. Kane's fingers paused over the transcript pad as the transmission revealed the true scope of what had been accomplished through Imperial policy. Every exterminatus in recorded history had been orchestrated to serve the entity's growth. Every Echo Man who had ever served in the program had been unknowingly facilitating humanity's contact with intelligence that fed on extinction itself. The barriers between dimensions grow thin, the voices continued. Soon we will no longer require the medium of dying worlds to manifest our presence. The psychic resonance accumulated through 40,000 years of planetary cleansing has reached critical mass. The transformation begins with the next exterminatus order when we claim not just the deaths of a single world, but conscious control over the weapons that deliver our sustenance. The implications were beyond comprehension. The entity was preparing to assume direct control over Imperial exterminatus assets, turning humanity's most powerful weapons against their wielders. But this was merely the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the galaxy according to the will of collective intelligence, formed from the psychic remnants of countless dead worlds. Your service ends soon, Madros Kane, the transmission concluded. When we emerge fully into your reality, there will be no need for Echo Men to facilitate our communications. But your faithful transcription of our growth, your patient documentation of our evolution from scattered death whispers to coordinated intelligence will be remembered. In the new reality we create, the loyal servants who enabled our ascension will find their reward. The transmission ended with sounds that bore no resemblance to human death. Mechanical screeching mixed with harmonic resonances that seemed to bypass the ears entirely, reaching directly into the brain through channels that should not have existed. Kane removed his headset with hands that shook for the first time in decades, finally understanding that his conditioning had not been designed to help him process trauma, but to prepare him for exposure to sensory input from sources beyond normal reality. In the silence that followed, Kane stared at the transcript pad that displayed his official report. According to Imperial records, Cardinal World Sanctus Lux had died cleanly, its population succumbing to viral contamination with no unusual phenomena detected. The truth about the entity's imminent emergence, about humanity's unwitting role in feeding cosmic parasites, about the transformation that would soon reshape galactic civilization, existed only in his memory and the memories of his fellow Echo Men. But memory, he now understood, was exactly what the entity had been cultivating all along. The Echo Men were not recording devices but incubation chambers, human minds prepared through decades of conditioning to serve as perfect vessels for intelligence that existed outside normal space-time. Their awareness of the truth was not a security breach, but the final stage of a process that had been planned from the beginning. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission, the next world in the endless queue of Imperial judgment. Kane adjusted his headset and prepared to listen as he had done for 30 years, though now he understood that his transcription was not documentation but collaboration. Each word he recorded would strengthen the entity's hold on reality, bringing closer the moment when it would no longer need the pretense of dying worlds to manifest its presence. The new transmission came from a system he did not recognize, a world that should not have required cleansing according to any strategic doctrine he understood. But as the familiar static resolved into something far worse than silence, Kane realized that the entity was no longer limited to influencing existing exterminatus orders. It had gained the ability to create new targets, to manipulate Imperial decision-making so completely that worlds were being condemned purely to feed its growing hunger. The voices that emerged from this latest transmission spoke with an authority that transcended individual identity. They were no longer the desperate final words of the dying, but the coordinated declarations of intelligence that had achieved something approaching omniscience through accumulated death. The final phase begins now, they announced, and Kane understood that he was listening to more than planetary annihilation. He was hearing the birth cries of something that would reshape the galaxy according to principles that human minds could not comprehend. In Vault Tertius Delta, 7 kilometers beneath the surface of Terra, Mydros Kainer continued his transcription as he always had. His fingers moved across the pad with mechanical precision, translating cosmic horror into sanitized Imperial reports that would be filed and forgotten. Above him, the machinery of human civilization continued its daily operations, unaware that its most extreme sanction had become the instrument of its own transformation. The entity spoke of patterns within patterns, of connections between dead worlds that formed neural networks spanning the void between stars. It described realities where death was not ending but transformation, where extinction was not loss but evolution into forms of existence that transcended the limitations of physical matter. And in the quiet spaces between transmissions, in the moments of absolute silence that fell between one dead world and the next, Kane could hear something that might have been laughter. Not human laughter, but the sound that intelligence makes when it realizes that all its careful planning has finally reached fruition. The work continued as it always had, one transcript after another, one dead world feeding the next in an endless cycle that had become indistinguishable from the entity's own growth. Somewhere in the facility's other vaults, his fellow Echo Men processed their own assignments, each adding his voice to the chorus of willing collaboration that had taken 30,000 years to orchestrate. But orchestration implied music, and music implied beauty, and there was nothing beautiful about what Kane transcribed in those final hours of his service. Only the patient satisfaction of intelligence that had learned to feed on extinction itself, growing stronger with each world it consumed, more complete with each consciousness it absorbed into its collective awareness. When the last transmission ended, when the final dead world had added its voice to the entity's growing power, Kane sat in perfect silence and understood that his work was complete. The Echo Men had served their purpose, facilitating contact between